Okay. It's that time. It's that time. Deep breath. Here we go. Here we go. This looks like good news. I realize that this looks like good news. On the face of it, that looks like some delicious butter, and the government announcing more butter. Well, this looks like good news. Well, I guess this is going to be definitely a recorded video. I need to explain the full situation here with butter in Japan. For those who are not familiar with my feelings about butter in Japan, so calming myself, settling the buffs. Okay, so basically Japan is a capitalist country. It's a free market economy with a few limited exceptions. For example, with rice. Now, rice in Japan was life and death. Japan is basically a rocky, mostly infertile sort of island country. There are waves. Anthropologists have found waves of Japanese that have tried, or people have tried living in Japan, and they've died out from starvation, and then different people have come and landed in Japan and they've starved. And it wasn't really until although the Yayoi and the Jomon people lasted for a pretty long time, it wasn't really until people brought in from China basically rice growing technology that they brought rice to Japan. But even then, really until the Edo Jidai, Japan was always a sort of one El Nino weather pattern, and the whole country would have a massive famine and death. So rice was really life or death. And and when in times of famine, I mean, the importance of rice was such that it was used to pay taxes. It was used as currency. The last time that Japan had a rice shortage was before World War II, and they went to go get some on the mainland, and it didn't go well for anybody, which is why after World War II, although America and Australia have been pushing Japan for a long time to open up to agricultural exports and to accepting rice, where they grow pretty much the same varieties of rice in Australia and America as in Japan, and despite of what anyone will tell you, it costs 1/20th the price, and it's pretty much indistinguishable. I mean, it's the same rice genetically, and they can grow it pretty much the same. So there's really the idea that Japan doesn't accept rice is kind of really unacceptable to Australia and America. But Japan always explains that no, this is actually not regular food. This isn't normal economics. This is national security, and this is probably the reason why China doesn't push Japan over this. China will not give Japan a hard time over making sure it remains fed, because they've been on the receiving end of this before. So Japan basically, whenever they do free trade negotiations, they always basically carve out rice and a couple of other sacred zone essential sort of foods and products from those talks, which they handle separately. Rice has always been one of them. However, what you might not know is that apparently somewhere along the line, dairy products, butter, has gotten itself in the same treatment as rice, where it's basically treated now as a sacred zone food product that's not up for grabs. In the TPP negotiations, it was a special restricted category where Japan would not allow free imports. On the free trade deal, which just kicked in with Europe as well, there's limited increases in allowed imports of cheese and butter and milk products, but still basically highly restricted. And this is more or less because of corruption. This is more or less because the way that the Japanese democratic system is set up, where you have the geographic race-based representation in the upper house, a vote in the countryside is worth 6 to 10 times more than it is in a city like Tokyo. Which is to say, this is part of the reason why Japan hunts whales, because there's only like 3 villages in Japan that hunt whales. No one cares about it, but 3 villages is like they can have 3 different representatives in parliament, where Tokyo with 25 million people will also only have 3 representatives. They carry disproportionate weight. Dairy farmers are sort of mostly over 85. They all donate wonderfully to the LDP, and they live all over the country. And you talk about pork barreling, this happens in every country with democracy, where people try to get favors for their hometowns by going down to Tokyo and getting some extra perks for the people back home in exchange for voting for them. Dairy farmers all over the country have been a very successful lobby to protect Japan from imports of butter. The result of this is that the government basically has taken control of the butter producing economy in order to basically guarantee a fixed, it's a bit like the European Union does as well. They guarantee basically a fixed, very high stable income for dairy farmers, at the expense, basically paid for by Japanese consumers, and they block them, they shield them from competition from overseas through basically two means. The first is that they prohibit the use of preservatives in milk products in Japan, which basically means that if you want to send cheese or milk or anything to butter or anything like that to Japan, you know, the shelf life of the product is going to be automatically deducted the time it takes to get to Japan, and the fact that you're not allowed to put preservatives into it, which means it's going to be only good for a few days. So you've got that where they sort of sabotage the products up front by not allowing them to put preservatives in, which you'll find in America, Europe, New Zealand, Australia, by default, all milk products have preservatives in them. The second thing that they do is they put crazy, they actually put crazy tariffs, and they have really strict quotas. So based on this, basically the Japanese domestic market is totally protected for these elderly farmers to be able to make a killing, and so you'd be assuming, well, they must be making butter like crazy then with all of this government protection. However, what's happening in Japan is that because the system is basically run by the government says how much they're going to pay to each farmer, and they tell them how much to make. This is basically the same sort of system that Stalin invented for food production in the Soviet Union. And it's also the same model of agricultural and economic management used in North Korea. There's this idea that the government knows better than consumers and knows better than farmers how to manage the economic production of butter, because, you know, government obviously knows best, and allow them to be in control to set the prices, to block the imports. And the result is that basically dairy production in Japan, in spite of being a highly sheltered and protected industry, it's collapsing. It's collapsing because the average age in the industry of farmers in Japan is over 85 years old. They're dying of old age, and no one wants to come in and take over the jobs. Japan's had a few unusual years in terms of weather, which basically affected the hay production, which meant that there were starving cows that weren't able to produce enough. We had butter shortages in recent years because there was insufficient hay for the cows. Last year there was an earthquake in Hokkaido which destroyed some of the butter infrastructure, the milk infrastructure. And the result of all of this has been there have been regular shortages in Japan of butter, and yet in spite of that, rather than just solving it the logical way and just allowing foreign butter producers to export to Japan and to allow people to buy Japanese butter the same way that they could buy foreign chocolate, or they could buy foreign, fruit, or foreign apples, or foreign anything else. They don't want to open it up for that, because they know the moment that they open the door to allowing people to import butter, that basically it'll be taking away the protection from an already dying industry in Japan. So instead of that, what they've done every year is two things. They've bulk imported butter from other countries, and they've pulled all of this butter and they've basically shared it out and rationed it to the different milk producing companies that are not meeting their production targets. And in supermarkets, most supermarkets, because of the supply shortage, instituted rationing, where you were not allowed to buy more than one block of butter. Now again, we're living in Japan, the third biggest economy in the world now. China's supposedly overtaken it, if you believe the statistics, and we're coming to that. And the most successful free trading country in the world, and we have butter rationing. A couple of years in a row, you go to the supermarket and you're not allowed to buy more than two blocks of butter. You have to buy one. Literally like the Soviet Union, literally like North Korea, and being managed by the Japanese government in the same way that Kim Jong-il manages food production in North Korea, a country that today still continues to have numerous famines for no good reason whatsoever. We have butter famines here in Japan. Literally shortages, and even within the shortages, they refuse to allow the millions and billions of butter farmers and milk farmers around the world to just sell their milk, even at a bit of a markup. They won't allow them to just come and sell in Japan. So as a result, the knock-on effects, were totally disastrous. There were bakeries that had to stop making cookies because they weren't able to buy enough butter to do their baking. Bread shops had to hold back and were rationing bread. School lunches were getting cut because the government basically was setting quotas that the farmers weren't able to produce, weren't able to meet the consumer demand. So they were suppressing the populace from buying butter products and rationing them in supermarkets. It's like queuing for coal in the freaking 1970s in Moscow. This is like Pyongyang. Japan and butter is like Pyongyang and North Korea, and Japan has just gone and signed a free trade agreement with the CPTPP, with Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and they still have put huge restrictions on, it's like a 20-year program to just loosen up a little bit the butter things. We've already just also gone into effect from a few days ago, I believe from January 31st. We got the free trade agreement with Europe into place, and even with that, that should be great news. But again, butter has been excluded as a sacred zone product. They've actually gone in, and apparently it's going to be, let's see if I can get that link. It's going to be that 15,000 tons of butter are going to be allowed over a long period of time to be imported at a reduced tariff, but it's still going to be, but everything above that will be at still the high tariff. In fact, there's butter on here somewhere. Just give me a second. They've got like a detailed, they've got a detailed rundown of the provisions. So there's cheese, and so cheese, wine, pasta is all good. Beef and everything also coming in. But for milk products, other than cheese, milk powder and butter, they're going to allow a quota of capped at 15,000 tons at a lesser tariff. So they're going to basically allow a block of. So basically, what the government's just announced that they're going to do, when they say that they're going to increase supply 50%, that means that they're going to they're going to basically purchase and import and ration a higher, like a warehouse stock of butter to prevent an undersupply, but they're not going to allow free trade of it. This is going to be a program where they're going to allow a little bit of that contribution to come from European farmers. But again, the country is using a failed Stalinist system of butter production, and it's totally ignoring the fact that it's just got like it has free trade agreements where the whole idea is Japan sells cars and buys butter. That's what the whole idea is supposed to be, and I don't know why anyone would even agree to a free trade agreement. I mean, rice, I get. Rice, that's fine. Although, of course, it doesn't help. I mean, this is the whole point. They're supposedly protecting butter, but there is no butter. You know, they can't make enough of it. This is the point. The economy here, the butter economy here has collapsed. It's like the ostrich economy in North Korea. And yet the Japanese government is still insisting on keeping it going, basically so that they can pay a fixed income to farmers who are basically should be retired and not even working. And this is the other problem, that they can't produce butter efficiently or milk efficiently because they're all small land holdings. They're not large, efficient, productive farms. But yeah, they just want to basically pay these people who support their local politicians an income pretty much until they die, which is probably going to be like when they're over 100. And until then, everyone in Tokyo is going to have to queue to pay overpriced substandard butter, and this is just going to keep going. It's just kind of nuts. So no, they love their butter Shizentaisu because it is in the sacred zone protected products, and in spite of the fact that the Japanese government is going to allow 50% imports, they're basically going to stockpile more imports for rationing. That's all that it's going to be in order to, but they're not going to allow free trade of it. So it looks like good news, but it's not. It's just a continuation of the absolute ridiculousness of the butter economy here. And yes, I just wanted to do that. I could go on for hours about this.